Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I want to circle back to J.D. Vance in this episode. I think we've given him a couple of weeks. Many people, some people I should say, are comparing his launch to Dan Quayle's launch as vice president nominee. And since you were there living that experience when you ran that campaign, maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how this compares and contrasts to those days.
Well, thanks, Dave. Just to be bipartisan about it, I want to say some people are also comparing it back to 1972 when George McGovern picked one Senator Eagleton who lasted 18 days. Unfortunately, he had some serious health issues in his background that nobody knew about. And it really, in a way, going all the way back there, it changed the way that the vice presidential nominees are who, when they're being considered, are vetted, because anything in the past can hurt. Well, let me just take a broad approach and then come to J.D. Vance. First of all, I think it's fair to say that the press don't really give the vice presidential nominees a very great break, and it's almost a classic Washington phenomenon of somebody gets put up on that pedestal and there's a desire to knock them off. I'm not blasting the press. That's just the nature of things. And so, yes, when Dan Quayle was selected, a senator who had been reelected once in his state of Indiana, a senator who had worked with us on national security affairs and foreign policy issues during the course of the campaign, somebody well known to us and to Bush, somebody who, by the way, two of our key advisors to the vice president, Bob Teeter and Roger Ailes, had both worked with Quayle in his campaign. So we thought he was very well known to us, only to spring the announcement and have the press immediately dig into every bit of his background and in some cases find what in fact, in almost all cases, found what we already knew and had been discussed in his senatorial campaigns. But they also bought into some rumors, which proved not to be so true. But people were caught by surprise, and it was a very rough launch. In fact, if I could take back anything over the 4 years that I was involved in as Chief of Staff to Vice President George H.W. Bush, it would have been the way we launched Dan Quayle, because actually Dan was better then he came off, and he deserved better from us in terms of his launch. But that having been said, it's just natural that a vice president's going to get very closely examined once they're named by the leading candidate. So when you come to Trump and Vance, the other thing I would say is I'm not sure if Donald Trump had his way, he'd even have a vice president. It's just not in his nature. He doesn't really want a partner there. He wants to be the only person, leading the charge. I think he got recommendations from his advisors, from his friends, and from his family, and he stuck with his family. And so he picked somebody that, by all reports, Don Jr. really embraced, because honestly, I don't think he cared that much. And then yesterday, on a Wednesday before black journalists, he proceeds to say that really the vice president doesn't matter very much. Historically, doesn't matter, doesn't really change anything, almost dismissing it as something that, it wasn't really my mistake because it does. I couldn't make a mistake. It doesn't mean anything. Well, it does mean something. And what I think it means, even if you don't see statistically a big bump on the numbers, it's a reflection of the decision-making process that somebody who could be president uses to make a big decision. And I think in this case, J.D. Vance has not served him well. They're not really aligned on a lot of things, it turns out. He's not as politically sophisticated as some thought he might be. And so, yeah, it goes down as not a good decision, and it's not been a good few weeks. Do I think he stays on the ticket? I think he probably does.
Alan, do you agree? You think that there's going to be some buyer remorse?
I think remorse is something that Donald Trump doesn't know anything about. So I don't think we have to worry about Trump's buyer remorse. Uh, you know, I basically agree with what Craig said. I mean, I assume that the Quayle uh, decision, I mean, comparing J.D. Vance to Dan Quayle is an insult to Quayle. I mean, you know, he had his shortcomings, but this guy is off the charts, in my view. I mean, you know, the Democrats are now using the word weird, and that probably is a compliment for him. Uh, uh, Look, 2 weeks ago when he was picked, I said that this was evidence that there was a double down strategy by Trump. Biden was still in the race, of course, and that Trump just, it was a MAGA double down. They're going to run a MAGA race. Uh, and everything indicates that even with Vice President Harris now starting to move up, and in some cases moving ahead in the polls, that Trump one seems a little bit befuddled, and they don't quite know how to handle her. But secondly, they're still going to They're still doubling and tripling down on this crazy MAGA strategy, which is, you know, reinforce your base, reinforce your base. Try to find, you know, a little blood in some stones that you've already squeezed to get a few more of your base voters out. And I think, you know, that's. You know, the comments about Cat Lady and all that J.D. Vance has made that are so offensive to most Americans probably ride okay with the base. So I think it's a continuation of his strategy. What he did yesterday, Trump did before the black broadcasters, or black journalists, which is absolutely, I mean, I found incredible in the middle of general election campaign where you have to reach out to swing voters. You know, he's going back to 2015, or you know, I mean, it's President Obama again. You know, birther. So it all seems to be aimed at trying to get, at least for now, this. What I think is a finite and decreasing market for Trump voters to get maximum out of that. You know, is he going to change it? I doubt it, but anything's possible with Donald Trump. And since it was a family choice to pick him, all he has to do is go to his family, Lara Trump, he made chairman of the party, to take him off, I suppose. But you know what? Next week, I think you're going to see an interesting launch of a vice presidential candidate. To me, the model, not to be modest, but was the Clinton '92 campaign, where we had a different set of criteria for picking our vice president. We were going to run a message campaign. Part of the message was the changing of the guard, and we had somebody who was just like Clinton, neighboring state, you know, broke all the old rules, but it delivered a message of a new, fresh, different kind of Democratic team. And they got on the bus tour and went around the country, and it created such excitement that we came out of there with a 25-point lead. And, you know, I mean, Craig knows this as well as anybody because he was on the other end. I've been on the other end plenty of times myself. And when you're down that big with somebody who knows how to run a campaign, you're in pretty deep trouble. And they had to play catch up the whole rest of the way. Yeah. So a good launch can help. We'll see what happens next week. But I think Vice President Harris will pick a running mate by Tuesday. They're supposed to launch it at a rally in Pennsylvania, a swing state, again showing the strategic purpose of the launch, and then we'll see what happens. But for J.D. Vance, I think he's been a disaster but that's my view. For Trump, it may be just fine because he's just as crazy as Trump.
Craig, I want to go back to the Chicago appearance of Trump at the Black Journalism Conference. It's stunning, isn't it? I mean, it just, and I guess the question is whether, as Al's suggesting, this is just part of the MAGA approach, or do you feel like he was just kind of losing it?
I think I think it validates exactly what Al said. I think that for some reason it's inexplicable to us because you've got to go get those undecided voters in the middle in order to win this. Trump seems incapable of doing that. He does not even give himself the opportunity to do that. Now, he went into an environment that he had to know was going to be critical, and rather than being in any sense, gracious, or, the classic is take the question and then give the answer you want, but he just engaged and started firing back, and and so it came across as a message to his MAGA supporters rather than a message to the undecided voter or the voter in the middle that he might be able to draw over. I do think he is still reeling from what he thought was a certain victory against Joe Biden, because he thought he could beat Joe Biden. And now he has to, he sees the polls also. He has to, regardless of what he says in his rallies, he has to wonder whether it's still within reach. And the only place he seems to be able to go is to his core base of supporters. But it was, when you look at the things that were said, they're just atrocious. Just atrocious. And I think one of the things that is so disturbing to me, of all the many things that are disturbing, this notion that there's like black jobs in America, and she asked him to define what he was talking about. He couldn't. But there's somehow jobs for black people in America that these millions of immigrants are taking away. Well, one, it's not true, and two, the whole concept is just anathema to what we all stand for and believe in. So he is not going to the center. I cannot see how this works. By the way, I've heard from some of my friends that I'm no longer, obviously, a Republican. Well, I still am a Republican. I just think that the only way to rebuild the party is to get rid of this virus that has somehow spread through it with ideas that are just completely foreign to the Republican Party of Reagan and Bush that I knew. So I don't know. I hope that he continues on a path and seriously narrows those who can support him to a minority, but we'll have to see.
Al, you have the last word this week.
Well, I think what I'd say is that this is both a double down on MAGA and that he's losing it. So I'd say it's a twofer. Look, the interesting thing is, as we've discussed before, the Trump strategy, Craig just said he expected to win big, and I think his strategy was really a Biden-dependent strategy. And one of the, now he's the old guy in the race. I suspect that a lot of the crazy things that lead me to call him Dementia Don will be back up as the campaign comes out, and because he's the one who looks like he's losing it against Harris, who seems to, she's really surprised me about how good a political performer she is. So that's one thing. He's now the old guy, and all these crazy things, the sharks and Hannibal Lecter and all those other things will be coming out again. But the other thing that I think it makes very clear, and this may be, this may be Trump his whole life, but it also may be part of his aging. He doesn't seem to be able to adjust to new circumstances. I think that's a really going to be very important because we'll see. 2 weeks is not a long time, excuse me, to make a decision about how agile or how talented Kamala Harris is, but she certainly looks like she's got real political skills. So they'll have an interesting campaign. It'll be a aggressive campaign. She's going to prosecute him hard, but I think it'll also be an agile campaign. And Trump just doesn't seem to be able to change with different circumstances.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. I mean, so you've got this unhinged candidate who even his own campaign and supporters can't really control, who has an inability to adjust to the changing circumstances of the campaign. Maybe I say this every election, and one of the times, we'll see the complete change in America, but America is becoming different. He attacked her because she couldn't decide whether she was Indian or African American. I mean, what a crazy thing. I mean, it's just insane. But the other point is the fastest growing ethnic group in America is biracial. 35 million biracial people in America. That's the new America. Yeah. I sit here and watch the Olympics, and everybody knows the story. The Chinese look like the Chinese, the Japanese look like the Japanese, the Europeans look like the Europeans, and the Americans look like everybody. And, that's the new America. Yeah. And we've talked about that for the last 5 years, about how politics has to adjust. Trump can't adjust. Can he squeeze out one more victory in the Electoral College by going the old way? Maybe. It's certainly possible. But it's also possible that this election, or certainly by the next one, the new America is going to dominate. And what looked like a Trump victory against a feeble old man may turn out to be a very solid Democratic victory this time because of Trump's own limitations, his own aging, his own unwillingness to change with America.
Hey, Dave, can I get 30 seconds for the last word?
Yeah.
And that is, as we're talking this morning, Thursday morning, there appears to be a negotiation underway on a prisoner swap with Russia and the U.S. And I raise it because if it happens, it looks like something's going to happen. It's a lead story in the nightly news. And you got to hand it to President Biden. He is not just sitting around doing nothing. He's actually making important things happen. And that's only accrues to the benefit of the Biden-Harris administration. And I suspect we're going to see more of that. He's talked about Supreme Court reform. I mean, there are initiatives coming out of the Biden White House that I think are going to actually do more to reach that undecided middle, than anything Donald Trump is doing.
I have to do it because it probably will be announced in a couple of days. Your last projection on the VP candidate for the Democrats?
I still think it probably will be Josh Shapiro. You never know, obviously. He just seems to me to be the most dynamic, the best political operator, the best campaigner of the group. And there's no way that a Democrat can win the election without winning Pennsylvania. And ordinarily, the vice presidential candidate doesn't bring anything in politically or even a state. But his approval ratings in Pennsylvania are so through the roof that you got to think it's worth a point or two.
Craig,
I think
you have the last
Harris,
guess.
I think Kamala Harris is going to announce Governor Shapiro on Monday and going to be with him first in Pennsylvania on Tuesday. And the two of them together, in sharp distinction to the Republicans with Trump and Vance, Kamala Harris and Shapiro will go to each of those close states where she also had choices, and they'll all be on a podium together, which will allow her to nearly own the news next week, the political news, and show a party that's coming together as Republicans are continuing to wonder whether Trump made the right choice.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.